Right, OK, let's turn our attention to Manchester United. And Manchester United believe they can tempt Mauricio Pochettino to be their new manager next summer. Legendary former United boss Sir Alex Ferguson is leading the quest to bring the PSG chief Pochettino to Old Trafford. talkSPORT understands that Pochettino's advisors have already held talks with members of the United hierarchy. Pochettino was keen to take charge of United before moving to Paris and remains keen on a return to the Premier League. United have paved the way for Pochettino by announcing they're looking to appoint an interim manager until the end of the season after sacking Ole Gunnar Solskjær. Perry Groves is alongside me. Mickey Gray is our Manchester correspondent and he's at the Etihad Stadium today. So many questions here, but first of all, hearing that news that talkSPORT understands that Mauricio Pochettino is on the list to replace him. I think we knew that he would be on the list, but the idea that they've already had discussions is a new development. What do you make of it, Mickey?
Well, it's a strange one because he's got an opportunity of winning the Champions League at the club that he's at right now, and he's got an array of world stars, Sam and Perry. I don't know if you agree with that. Obviously, I'm sure you do. But if Manchester United have an interim manager in charge until the end of the season and they don't finish in those top four positions, then is it a good job for Pochettino to come back to?
It's a shambles, Mickey, to be honest. A club of Manchester United's stature, how can they not have contingency plans? Surely if you're a board of directors, and I know Ed Woodward's sort of moving on, but surely you would have the manager that you want and know who you're going to go for. Now, so they're going to have so what they're saying is this season, if Pochettino is going to take over at the end of the season, have an interim manager, so they're just writing this season off.
Yeah.
Is that what they're saying?
After 12 games in the Premier League. I just do not understand that. This is one of the biggest clubs in the world. We've heard that so many times. But it says to me as well that there wasn't a plan B in place.
Nothing, no.
Nothing in place whatsoever, because they've been hoping that Ollie was going to turn it around, and I think it was the final straw with the result yesterday against Watford, which nobody saw coming, and it's happened again.
Well, you say nobody saw it coming, but let's be honest about it. We all knew he was going to have to be fired at some stage, because after you lose 5-0 at home to Liverpool, and then
that's when he should have got sacked,
thrashed within an inch of your life by Manchester City, and you only end up losing 2-0, and actually it doesn't look like a bad result when you see it on paper. But we were there that day. It was absolutely terrible.
Liverpool stopped. They were lucky that Liverpool stopped playing at their full capacity, because it could have been, if Liverpool would have gone for it in the second half, it could have been 8 or 9. That's not an exaggeration. Man United were all over the place.
So I think it's worth pointing out that it's not just Ole Gunnar Solskjær that is the problem, and just changing the manager, and certainly changing it for an interim and then an interim manager, which is what they're going to do over the next couple of weeks, is not just the only answer. They need a proper structure in place. This is a club that hasn't really got a chief executive. Ed Woodward announced in April that he was going to leave the club. It looked like they're going to replace him with one of his mates from the banking and business world who's been on the Manchester United board for the last couple of years, and he's just going to slip into that position. It's going to be a seamless transition. But Manchester United don't need a seamless transition at that stage. They need a chief executive with a bit of footballing nous to come out, to be given the job so that they can actually organise the situation behind the scenes.
Do you know what you just said there, like the interim? Ole Gunnar Solskjær had no power over this group of players. I've mentioned before, and Mickey will tell you, there's 3 players there that
bigger than him.
They're bigger than him, right? Which obviously Ronaldo, Pogba, and Fernandes. So when an interim manager comes in with no authority, basically because they know he's only at the end of the season, do they think that this group of players are going to start giving everything for the interim manager that they know they're going to be longer than them? It's a mess.
What's the solution, Mickey?
Well, if you look at the clubs that are above them and the ones that we want to talk about, the sides that are probably going to go on and win the Premier League, they've got managers, of course they have, and they work in training and tactics when it comes to matches at the weekend. But the dressing rooms run themselves. Those players in the dressing rooms at Chelsea, Manchester City and Liverpool run themselves. Of course they've got fantastic coaches. That's not the case at Manchester United.
But Mickey, I'll tell you what, though, you say they run themselves, right? All of those players are frightened of their manager. All those players.
Without a doubt.
So what you got at the moment is Ole Gunnar Solskjær had no fear factor.
But you can't just run the whole business by fear. You need to run the whole business by respect. There needs to be someone who walks into that dressing room and commands respect of those players. Is there anybody on the scene at the moment who you could turn around and say to me, if he walks in tomorrow, he'll command respect until the end of the season? Because that's what they're going to do.
Not the end of the season. Zinedine Zidane is probably one of the few managers that would walk straight in to that dressing room and go, all right, lads, I'm a World Cup winner, I'm a Champions League winner as a player, I'm a Champions League winner as a manager, he would have control of that dressing room instantly. This is a real fractured dressing room because you said about fear, Sam. You have to be frightened of the manager, but the manager has to know about his tactics, has to know about his philosophy. This wouldn't happen for the elite managers, the free managers that Mickey's meant there, because all of the players are frightened of that manager. It's quite basic, but you've got to know what you're doing. I think this goes back to when Solskjaer took over, was it December 2018? The initial remit was, you're going to come in, Mourinho was a dark cloud, wasn't he? He'd upset everybody. It was a really bad atmosphere around the place. Lift it for us. You're a club legend. Everybody loves you. He did brilliantly. I think he won 14 of his first 19 games, right?
Yeah.
Then he was going to go back to mould, wasn't he, at the end of that season? Yeah. Because he'd done so well.
And because they did well I think it was in Paris, they got through to the next round of the Champions League in dramatic circumstances.
That's no long-term thinking. Go, OK, you've done really well. Woodward took the easy way out because the fans loved him and got carried away and gave him a 3-year contract.
Yeah, but that's not Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's fault. That is the board's
leadership
fault.
From the top,
and
exactly.
That's the issue. They need to get a proper person who knows how to run a football club, someone who's done the job before. You look at Manchester City, the structure they've got in place above Pep Guardiola. They're all people that have done the job before at big clubs. They know how to handle transfer negotiations. They know how to build a club from the bottom to the top. Manchester United do not have that. They've got a collection of people who have helped the Glazers buy the club, have helped the Glazers keep the club ticking over and making money commercially, and people that have previously played for Manchester United. There's nobody who's got who you would have a doctorate in running a football club. They're all amateurs at it, really.
There's no long-term vision, no long-term plan. Mick will tell you, when you go to the games, Mick, don't you, and report the games.
Yeah.
When you go and watch Liverpool play, you know exactly how they're going to play. You know exactly how the clubs run. When you go and watch Man City play, exactly the same. Chelsea is a different kettle of fish because if you're not successful there after a season, you're out. But they always go and get a top-quality manager. So it's leadership is right from the top, Mick, isn't it? And it
100%.
Comes down.
100%. The club from top to bottom has got to be run right. If not, you get left behind. And that's the problem at Manchester United. They've been left behind over the last 10 years. Yeah, they've reached finals and they've finished second in the Premier League, but that's not what Manchester United won. You just mentioned Zidane there, Perry. Now, he's not working at the moment. So that says to me that he's not the guy that they're looking for to take over at Manchester United, because if he was, then he'd be in place maybe even tomorrow. They'd negotiate a contract for him and he would walk through the door, and then you're right, he would respect those players and the players would respect him because of what he's achieved in the game as a player and as a manager. So they're obviously looking at somebody who's in work at the moment. They're going to stick with this interim manager forever, however long.
Yeah, but do you believe that? Do you believe that? Because, like, I mean, the narrative will be spun that they've got an eye on a candidate that's going to move there in the summer, and they've done this and they've done that. But ultimately, you know, the history of Manchester United recently is they sack a manager, they bring one in, they make him the interim manager, and then they get it for a couple of years because they do a half-decent job.
They have to learn from the mistakes, Sam. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, yeah, correct. But Ole Gunnar Solskjaer should have walked away from Manchester United after the first season when he came in as interim manager. Then they offered him a new contract. He's now been there for the last couple of seasons. Yes, there's been progression and he has galvanised the squad. They are a better group of players than what we saw under Jose Mourinho. But if Zinedine Zidane is going to be top of that tree, if they're going to bring him into Manchester United, you bring him in now. You bring him in and you have a 2-3 year contract.
Absolutely, but that would have, for whatever reason, this hasn't been done. That would have needed some forethought, and they would have needed to have put planning in place in order to be able to do that. What I don't understand is that they seemingly have sacked him without a plan of what to do next.
Because they wanted Ole.
That they knew that this was not going to work if they'd watched any of the last 6-7 games of this season. I mean, it was so clear that it was coming to an end.
The thing is, sorry, Mick, I'd like to know, with their, you spoke about philosophies, even the signings when Jadon Sancho came in, everybody knew that Manchester United were crying out for a centre midfield, a holding centre midfield player. You didn't need a Jadon Sancho.
But that goes back to structure and not having someone who's in charge of recruitment.
Oh, no, but even recruitment as a manager, we mentioned the 3 elite managers from the top 3 clubs at the moment. There would be no players coming into their football club that they didn't think that they needed, or they needed strength in different areas. So the whole thing is just basically incompetent. The whole situation at Manchester United is incompetent.
And how long were they chasing after Jadon Sancho? And Cristiano Ronaldo, when he came available, they all thought he was going to go to Manchester City, and they thought, wow, we better bring him back to Man United. We can't have him going to Man City. They were the wrong players for that football club. You're completely right, Perry. They needed that holding midfield player. They needed a centre-half for 3 seasons. We've all been saying that Lindelof and Eric Bailly were not good enough for Manchester United. That's where the big problem is. Above Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the director of football, or whatever you want to call him, bringing in the right people for Manchester United, and that's why they fall short this season. Their performances have been poor. You watch them on a weekly basis. I'm there, I watch every home game. Fred and McTominay are not the answer for Manchester United moving forward. And the sarcasm over the last couple of weeks. Van der Beek comes off the bench against Man City. He gets cheered on every time he touched the ball or he chased back to try and win the ball back for his team. They were cheering. He's just been there, he's walked through the door, he's not performed, he's not played well enough to get into the starting 11. And this, tongue-in-cheek, it was a bit of a laugh and joke over the last couple of weeks. Yes, he scored yesterday. I think people have probably forgot about that, actually. But they're the wrong type of players for Manchester United. And if they don't start getting it right, I think Roy Keane said this 10 years ago. He said it might be 20 years before Man United win the Premier League again. He's probably right.
I think that what's really interesting is that it's pretty clear that behind the scenes on the footballing side, they've tried to restructure the way they operate, coaching staff, technical director, sporting director. They've got people, they've just moved people into positions to try and build a structure so that they've got a long-term feel about how they develop players and bring them through the academy and into the first team, etc., and how they identify targets. But in terms of the overall recruitment over the last couple of years, it hasn't been good enough. If you look at Jadon Sancho, for example, Jadon's obviously an incredibly talented boy. Understandably, he was courted by a lot of people because he is a brilliant footballer who possesses a lot of talent. But it doesn't take too much digging into his personality to understand that unless he's treated in a particular way, it's often that you don't get the best out of him. And he has the penchant to turn up late. He has the penchant to go off and go to parties he's not supposed to go to. Like he flew into the UK, I think, for a party at Tammy Abraham's house when he was at Borussia Dortmund, or in the middle of a lockdown situation. So, that doesn't take too much to sort of understand before gunning out £73 million on a player and then going after 4 or 5 months. Oh, I'm surprised it hasn't worked out with him and he hasn't fitted in properly.
But they go in depth more so than when Mickey and myself played, right?
Do they?
What they on this psychological profiling?
Do they?
They look at the player's background.
Did they?
But obviously they haven't done their due diligence properly, because what you've just explained there, and you're not in the inner circle of the game, are you? You're not, it's only what you hear on the circuit, and he's a young fella. And also the expectations of Man United are far different to expectations at Borussia Dortmund.
Of course, he's out of the limelight.
And he's a young player as well. So he's probably been it's wrong place, wrong time for a young player like him. But the whole mishmash, when you look at it, and I can't believe that people are surprised. We had ex-Manchester United players, legends by the proper Man United, like Gary Neville, like Rio Ferdinand, saying, "Oh, we're all right." No Ollie's at the wheel, which everybody takes mickey of. But they were backing him. And you're looking at it going, it doesn't work that you go from not being good enough to be at Cardiff City and them getting relegated, right? That all of a sudden you go to an elite football club, but you're not an elite manager. So the whole decision making right back in this 3 years, I know, Mickey, and you said they've progressed, which they have, but that's more to do with having brilliant individual players, getting them out of trouble. They're 20-game unbeaten run away from
28,
home.
Yeah.
Like we was watching loads of games here, Sam, where they went 1-0 down, went 2-0 down, and it was individual brilliance that got them out of trouble, not because of team structure or philosophy or team shape or making great substitutions. So the whole thing is inept. The whole part of Manchester United at the moment is inept. So it needs someone to go in there, and you talk about the structure and the coaches behind the scenes. Fans like to hear that because there is a progression, but really they're not really bothered about the coaches behind it and what's happening at the academy. They're just bothered with what happens with their first team when they're playing. That's all they're bothered about, is winning games.
That squad of players still now is good enough to finish in the top 4.
Exactly. So they need to ensure they get someone who can make that happen.
Correct, Sam. Yes, they do. And the right appointment has to walk through the door at Manchester United. But the wrong way to do it is bringing an interim manager in, because the players can then think to themselves, well, this interim manager's not going to be there at the end of next season.
We'll be there longer than you.
Yeah, exactly. So the players were then... It's pretty much a similar scenario to what they've just been in with Ole Gunnar Solskjær. As you mentioned there before, Perry, there's players at that football club were probably bigger than Ole Gunnar Solskjær, or thought they were bigger than Ole Gunnar Solskjær. If an interim manager comes in now till the end of the season, they're going to have the same thought process in their head of thinking, well, wherever we finish, it doesn't matter, because there'll be a new manager coming in for the following season, and that's when we can start to perform. They've got to start performing now. They've got 26 games to get themselves into that top 4. That's a lot of time.